This is Wake Up and Lead, a daily podcast where ambitious young professionals learn to lead themselves. I'm your host, Hampton Dorch. Today we're talking about our futures. It is time to get out of the weeds. I'll give you a story. So I have been around a lot of CEOs, and obviously I'm not a CEO, but what I've heard them say is, golly, I got to get better at working on the business instead of in the business. And a lot of times, when you are running something big, and trust me, I'll bring this back to us, but when you have, something big and a lot of responsibilities, it's easy to just be a doer and be down in the weeds and do things. And I think for a lot of CEOs, there's a few reasons why they might do this. One, maybe there's just a lot to be done. And so they're always trying to be scrappy and get things done and check things off the list. But I think a bigger reason, and this applies to me and you, is fear. They're like, oh, well, I want to use all the things that have to be done as an excuse to say I didn't have enough time to think strategically, to be a visionary, and to work on the business. So a personal example for my life would be this podcast. My priority from a professional standpoint is my job at WildSpark. Head over heels. I get paid, not head over heels, head and shoulders. It is my priority. I get paid to work at WildSpark, and this is something that I do for the most part outside of that time. It does contribute to WildSpark a little bit. Not going to get into that, but because of that, I made the excuse of, well, I don't really have time to think from a visionary standpoint about Wake Up and Lead. I'm just going to kind of like coast and do what I can to sustain it and be consistent. And while I'm proud of myself for doing that and not giving up, eventually I said, no, if I care about it, I'm going to make time to think or to work on Wake Up and Lead instead of in it. And what that looked like was me diving into listening to this podcast called Grow the Show, where I learned about podcasts. And I realized all of a sudden, wait, I don't really like listening to 45-minute interviews of random people I don't know. Sure, I might like Hampton a little bit. That might be why I occasionally listen, but I would rather listen to small bite-sized learning. Like why would I listen? Why would I want to just like listen to something random? I want to listen to small bite-sized learning where I know what the topic is on. I don't want to waste my time. And so I was like, if I want to learn that way, why wouldn't I shift the podcast to that? And that was because I allowed myself to zoom out a little bit, and I had to clear my schedule in certain ways. So yes, it does require sacrifice. I had to get out of the weeds and think a little bit more strategically from a visionary standpoint. And so for you, you're probably not a CEO of a company, but think about your job. Think about, are there visionary things that you need to think about and that you need to zoom out a little bit, or think about your life? I talk about this a lot when it comes to our futures. What direction are we going in? So often we're thinking very short term. How much money am I making this month or this year? Instead of thinking long term, am I going in the right direction, or am I going to wake up in 10 years and say, what the heck did I just do? I was talking to someone the other day that said that they just coasted through a decade of their career and they would do anything to go back to being in their 20s. So for you, you've got to work on the business, on your life, on your job, instead of always in it. Both are very important. There's seasons for both of them. But I think so often we make the excuse to stay in it because we are afraid of failing if we zoom out, think visionary, and go for something big. It's time for you and me to wake up and lead.